Hello students, welcome back to this second video focusing on English Language A-Level Component 1 Section B Language Issues, specifically the Standard and Non-Standard English choice. Okay. In the first video we looked at some stimulus material which was an extract from a letter sent home to parents by a primary school which seemed to be recommending only standard English forms and some particular pronunciations and so forth. Now, what other kinds of stimulus material could you get? And what we have in this example, again it's from Educast themselves, is a quote from an expert, a theorist. This is an extract from an article entitled "It's Time to Challenge the Notion that There is Only One Way to Speak English," and it's from The Guardian by a writer called Harry Ritchie, okay, who's a journalist and author, and you can see he wrote English for the Natives, Discover the Grammar You Don't Know, you don't know you know, okay? So the quote is, interestingly, it picks up on, or we can relate it rather to one of the examples that was in the other stimulus material. Okay, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. Non-standard English is linguistically the equal of the standard version. In fact, dialects tend to be more sophisticated grammatically than standard, as in the plural use of many non-standard dialects where standard has just one confusing form. Yet standard continues even now to be prized as the correct form, and any deviation is considered to be wrong, lazy, corrupt, or ignorant. So, as is really quite normal for these kind of questions, a pretty challenging quote there. Something really that's pitched at a very, very sophisticated level and is inviting you to engage with sophisticated arguments, okay? I put a few questions along the bottom here, using this extract as a starting point, analyse and evaluate the privileged position of standard English in our language and culture. Seems to be focused on something like that, or maybe using this extract as a starting point, analyse and evaluate the relative importance of standard English and non-standard varieties of English, or something like using this extract as a starting point, analyse and evaluate the proposition that there is a right and wrong way to use English. So it's a challenging one, this, Steve.
Absolutely. I think it's straight away it's pointing out that, look, maybe from a descriptivist point of view there is equality with standard and non-standard English, but putting it into a social context, isn't it, that people view one form as it says, they're lazy, corrupt or ignorant. So you have to be thinking about the attitudes towards these, I say two varieties, many varieties of language, and thinking where standard English comes from and its role in our culture, as well as how non-standard English is appropriate or inappropriate to use in different contexts. So it's a lot to think about.
And as you're responding in your opening paragraph or paragraphs to this material, you've got that good example of use being such a useful pronoun. If you remember it, it is the second person plural. Standard English, second person singular is you, and in standard English, second person plural is also you. But this non-standard form, and it says it's many non-standard dialects. I know it from sort of Liverpool and Manchester. It has this very, very useful difference between the two forms. So. It really does show that non-standard forms can be just as rich, just as interesting, and rewarding as standard English. So it makes the, quite a powerful statement towards the end. Standard continues even now to be prized as a correct form. And any deviation is considered to be wrong, lazy, corrupt or ignorant. So it's looking for you to sort of engage in a pretty heated debate about these things, and people do get upset about these issues.
Absolutely. If you can get some paragraphs together, and certainly sets of examples together about what perhaps would be judged by a prescriptivist to be wrong, lazy, corrupt or ignorant, and then say perhaps how those examples might be okay to use in different contexts, that would be, you're tackling the argument while having a linguistic basis for your discussion. I think you've got to be able to deal with, the concept there of a single and plural pronoun, for example, and you've got to be able to do that in confidently. So you need to have those examples at your fingertips and lots of them ready.
So let's see, just in terms of a sort of structure to our answer, we have our first section. This might be a paragraph or 2 paragraphs or even up to half an answer. But my feeling is like this kind of fairly short quotation invites a fairly succinct response, and then moving on to your own examples. So response to stimulus as a starting point, and then we're looking, and one thing you were saying is maybe going into these sort of prescriptivism and descriptivism as a kind of interesting way in. And one thing I really heard you mention very clearly was the idea of lots of examples, because your success on this kind of question hinges on your ability to pull out from the hat loads of particular examples and be able to quote them and describe them grammatically, technically, using the correct linguistic terminology.
That's what that evidence collector was about. That's what you can use your scrapbooks for this. You can use all the resources we've already given you in the course to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth saying, when you deal with concepts such as prescriptivism, descriptivism, be really careful with this. Maybe it's not the best thing to do is to just label the attitude of this article, because this is stating the case that non-standard forms of English are judged to be more negatively than standard forms. It's not arguing for that.
Yeah.
So be really careful not to label this view as prescriptivist, for example. I would argue this is a descriptivist view, where it points out a prescriptivist view within the discussion. So be very careful not to label too easily at the beginning.
Okay, taking this forward then, in our answer to the previous one, we had, we drew on our knowledge of particular dialects. Maybe, did you see some scope here for bringing in knowledge of your own dialect features, like Lancashire, Manchester?
Absolutely. I think we've got the same thing, is that you have to adapt it to the question, but you can have a lot of your same ideas, and it's about structuring them perhaps differently according to the question. But yeah, definitely here you can have examples of Lancashire and Manchester. You could have examples of multi-ethnic youth dialect, could be another paragraph, and there's crossover between those two forms. We have examples of multi-ethnic youth dialect, oh my days, which I've heard a lot of students saying in this college. So there's crossover.
So, and again, it's lots of examples. If you want to write about multi-ethnic youth socialect, you want to write about Lancashire, Manchester, and construct a convincing case, you do need to be really retrieving from your memory ideas and clear examples that you can quote and include in there. So we've got the response to the stimulus. We've got some ideas of prescription, descriptivism. Possibly here again, something about standard and non-standard. Other ideas about standard and non-standard.
Well, where they come from, things like
maybe
that.
the history of them. Why they to be considered as the correct form. I think possibly here it's almost like ideas of power might be coming in, and prestige, and overt prestige. I'm thinking like Giles and so forth.
Definitely, and like you said before, the ideas of restricted and elaborated codes, they're linked to power. If you go to a court, they will be using an elaborated code, and that's so not things you study in language and power. Absolutely applicable to the standard non-standard English question as well.
So perhaps you mentioned particular situations like sort of legal or courtroom language,
where you might therefore talk about the importance of standard English. We know, for example, the Howard Giles capital punishment experiment, where people with strong accents, non-standard English, were given longer jail sentences.
And again, I think actually we're the idea of the classroom situation is also an educational context. Bring back some of that material on education. I don't know where this would go. Maybe even this would perhaps even go even earlier. Maybe once you've sort of dealt with it, maybe dealt with prescriptive and descriptivism, perhaps even somewhere here-ish. You might be thinking of sort of, you know, classrooms. What's really interesting, of course, is that, you know, these examples we've got in front of us are not going to be set, not going to be exactly these examples. So things you've seen, examples you've seen in that one we just showed you before, or this one, you can bring them in. You can learn from these and actually include them in your arguments.
Yeah, I think perhaps another thing is you can refer back to things you've done in class, such as, say, Emma Thompson's extract that we used in previously, or the Michael Rosen and Lindsay John's debate about the appropriateness or not of using standard non-standard English. You know, bring in other examples that you have studied, quote other people. It doesn't have to be a theorist, it could be somebody else's opinion as well.
Okay. We're going to leave this one for now, and we'll be back with a further example of stimulus.
Yay.